Let me ask you something real quick. If a severe storm hit coastal North Carolina tonight, would you be prepared? Because here's the thing most people don't realize until it's too late. Severe weather doesn't just test your emergency kit. It tests your home, it tests your preparation, it tests your location. I'm Stephen L. Skakandi with the Skakandi Group of living in and around Jacksonville, North Carolina. And with the backdrop of Snowmageddon 2026, the likes of which, by the way, we haven't seen a snowstorm like this since 1989. So please don't think this is a frequent occurrence. We're going to be talking about your preparation, how storms like this and other natural weather phenomena will affect your home, it'll affect your safety, and your biggest investment. This isn't about fear. This is about preparation. So let's go ahead and take it from here. I'll tell you what, I've lived here for over 25 years now, and living in coastal Carolina is absolutely amazing. We have, in my humble opinion, some fantastic beaches. We've got access to some nearby cities with amenities. And if I don't mind driving a little further out of my way, I can have things like mountains. In short, North Carolina as a whole has a little bit of everything. But sometimes it comes with a cost. And that cost can certainly be things like the extreme weather patterns we have. Now, everybody talks about and speaks about the hurricanes when they come. Now, when I compare hurricanes to other weather phenomena, such as earthquakes that the good people around Camp Pendleton deal with, or perhaps a tornado that people out in the Midwest deal with, I personally prefer hurricanes. Now, why do I prefer hurricanes? Well, my philosophy is very much like Vince Lombardi or Bill Belichick. You give me a couple weeks to prepare and I'll beat anybody. And that's exactly how I feel about hurricanes. We typically have 2 weeks to prepare and decide what we're going to do. Earthquakes and tornadoes, not so much. Now, having said all that, what are some other weather patterns that we deal with in coastal Carolina? Well, sudden temperature drops. My gosh, I was out in a t-shirt the other day and now I'm huddled down in a jacket. We have things like ice storms, which Snowmageddon or perhaps the Snowicane, if you prefer. We have such things as power outages. And I'm not just talking about people running into the power poles. How about high winds? High winds is something we frequently encounter, certainly at the coast. We do have some flood tides from time to time. But again, I'm less worried about floods because the great thing about being at the coast, the water comes in and the water goes back out again. And of course, where I'm sitting, we do have some unfortunate weather once in a while in the winter and hurricanes. The difference here isn't if a storm will happen, it's when it will happen. And the key is making sure that your home is prepared versus an unprepared home. So you're not sitting in a built-up fighting position like I am. That's why preparation matters more than panic. Okay, so as we dive into this, let's start with the basics. And I think a great place to start would be a dedicated home emergency kit. Before you rush out to the store and buy something extremely expensive that has all this whiz-bang stuff, start with the basics. You can build this on your own by simply going to a place like Dollar General or Rose's or even the local Food Lion and possibly Home Depot to get some of the more basic stuff. You don't need a lot, but it's better to have something than nothing. So what are some basic things that you should think of? Well, the first thing I would say, things like non-perishable foods. So non-perishable foods, canned goods. You can't go wrong with canned goods. You know, canned vegetables, canned fruit. You can even get Spam in the can. There's all kinds of canned goods, as well as things such as beef jerky and other things that come in bags that are vacuum sealed. A lot of that stuff will last a long time. You don't have to get crazy. It just has to keep you going. Another thing I would think about, and a lot of people don't, a manual can opener. Sometimes these cans have pop tops, sometimes they don't. But a manual can opener where you can easily go in there and pull your food out makes all the difference. I would also have bottled water. All you need to think about is 1 gallon per person per day with bottled water. Now, that's assuming you're not doing a lot of heavy, rescue work or perhaps maintenance on your property. And then, of course, water consumption can go up. Water consumption can also go up depending if we're talking about the summer months versus the winter months. Having said that, a mistake a lot of first-timers make is that it's cold, I don't have to drink a lot of water. And what a lot of people fail to realize is when it is cold and you're breathing, that vapor coming out is actually you dehydrating yourself. So even in the cold and winter months, you still need to think about, at a minimum, 1 gallon per person per day. Flashlights. No, don't just rely on your iPhone or Android to provide electricity for you. There are some great options out there with flashlights. There's the old hand crank options, which are great if the batteries die, or you can get a normal flashlight with anything from AAA to D batteries at the local hardwood store. Extra batteries for the flashlight, and there's a really cool trick with a pair of aluminum foil and a 9-volt battery that you can use to get a fire started. So batteries come in a lot of different shapes and sizes depending on what they're needed for, and they can be helpful for other things as well. Don't forget a first aid kit. A basic first aid kit with antiseptic in it, as well as bandages, will go a long way to helping you with basic trauma. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention to look at taking a basic first aid class that might be offered by the American Red Cross or at a place like Coastal Carolina Community College. Check into those things. It's always good to brush up on skills, and if you get a certification out of it, all the more better. A battery-powered or hand-crank radio. Again, you can't depend on that iPhone or Android always working, and it's great to go old school. Something that has frequency modulation or amplitude modulation. That's right, an old FM AM radio for those of you under 30 years old that have never heard those terms before. Those work swell. So why does this matter for homeowners? Because power outages can last for hours or days depending on where you're at. And homes that are well prepared can shelter in place and remain calm, cool, and collected for longer periods of time. Okay, so now we're going to talk about insulation and sheathing. Now, you can see where I'm at right now. I don't have a lot of either one right now. This was something very proud of my son he made, and this is a Marine Corps fighting position. But let's go ahead and get back to insulation and sheathing. Let's talk about attics, okay? Let's talk about crawl spaces and exterior walls. So with attics, what's the big problem with attics? Well, a lot of times that scuttle that goes to the attic or those pull stairs, a lot of times a lot of heat is lost there, okay? And a lot of cold air seeps in there. Why? Because at that attic door or that hatch access way, nobody ever takes the time to insulate it. So if you go ahead and you put some insulation over top of that door and keep it in place, that goes a long way to line the attic. Another thing that happens over time, you'll find that insulation will start to get low and it doesn't maintain the air. This air spaces that's supposed to warm up and it'll depress over time. You want to keep a certain layer of insulation up there as well. So it's important to check every so often. And every few years might be a good idea to think about adding some more insulation to overcome that over time. Next thing, crawl spaces. Now, a lot of homes, of course, are built on slab in Coastal Carolina. But if you do have a crawl space, it's important to go in there and check in there from time to time. A lot of people forget and never go in. and they don't see that insulation starts sagging from the floors, and that's not ideal. Consider taking the time and the money to go ahead and lay a vapor barrier on the ground to make sure all the insulation is up, and maybe add some dehumidifiers down there in order to process air so your floors don't start sagging from underneath. I love crawl spaces, but it's just something that has to be maintained if you've got one. So make sure you do that. Exterior walls. The big thing with exterior walls is check your siding from time to time. Due to things like weed trimmers and lawn mowers, you might get holes in your vinyl siding. Make sure you patch those up from time to time. Let's talk about sealing. Around such areas as doors, windows, and garage entries. A lot of times I have seen people lose sealant around their doors. I've seen pets gnaw on the insulation around the doors. Make sure they don't do that, and if they do, make sure you replace it. That way you can get that insulation factor back. There's a lot of cooling and heating that you lose around those access points. Same thing with windows, okay? Make sure your window seals are good. And finally, garage entries. Hey, garage doors in and of themselves let in a lot of heat or let in a lot of cold, depending on the time of year it is. They've got some great options to insulate the back of the doors. It doesn't create the 100% solution, but every little bit helps as you try to keep your warm properly insulated. Because we want to keep the heat in or out depending on the time of year. And if you can maintain a steady temperature no matter what year it is, that means you can keep energy costs down. Something else you might want to consider, keeping pipes protected. Generally speaking, this storm aside, we generally don't have a lot of cold, but it's still not a bad idea to insulate those pipes. Some cheap insulation or pool noodles from the local Dollar General can certainly help you out with that. So these upgrades I just discussed, they'll help you during the storms. They will improve your comfort year-round, and it also adds long-term value to your home. So it's definitely stuff to consider, whether it's a storm or not. Okay, this one is critical. Smoke detectors and generators, okay? We've got to keep heat or cool. So generators help out a lot with that. Generators, fireplaces, and space heaters. So the key with generators is, hey, we got to be aware of carbon monoxide. So each home, you want to make sure you test things like your smoke detectors, your carbon monoxide detectors, and you replace batteries a minimum of twice a year. I like to do it every 6 months. So do it January 1st, and then I do it again at the end of June, July 1st, and do it for the last half of the year. I find that this works really good, okay? This isn't optional. This can be life-saving. And the other thing is, you never want the smoke detectors to go off at 3 a.m. in the morning, because generally speaking, that's an emergency in and of itself. Going back to generators, I would say make sure you never use it inside the home, okay? Use it outside the home. If it's gas or propane, it's properly ventilated. Let's talk about preparing your family. That is key. And it all starts with communication. Storms don't disrupt power, they disrupt communication. And in the words of an old company commander that I had, communication is the toughest thing that we do. Every family should have a contact plan, a meeting location, backup contacts outside the area. So let's dive into that in a little bit more detail. So as far as a contact plan is concerned, how do we get in contact with different members of our family? I would say you want to have a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary, just like we did in the Marine Corps, okay? A meeting location. Once again, if the problem is inside the home, have a place outside the home. And if it's a place where you can't go home, you should have one of those as well. Once again, a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary. And finally, backup contacts outside the home. Are there other people that are dear friends or extended family members that you want to make sure come with you? That's all stuff to take into consideration. Let's talk about emergency alerts, okay? Make sure your phone gets information from the National Weather Service, as well as local emergency notifications. And be careful about relying on social media rumors. Finally, when we're talking about communication, don't forget about such things as medication and neighbors. What I mean by that is keep additional streams of medication at hand, because you never know exactly how much medication you'll need and how long you'll need it for, depending on how you're trying to get out of Dodge. And make sure, because we only have each other to rely on, make sure you take into account elderly or potentially sick neighbors. Make sure they have a place to go and include them in your plan. Okay, so here is where all our disaster preparation ties in for home buyers. Prepared homes suffer less damage, they cost less to insure, they hold value better, and of course they sell faster. So I should say this really works for both buyers and sellers, because buyers will one day become sellers. So when I walk homes with buyers, they're asking me, is the home elevated? Is the crawl space sealed? Are systems maintained? Has the seller been proactive? So if you're a home seller, thinking of being a home seller, these are all good questions that you should think about now versus later on. Preparation isn't just safety. Preparation is smart ownership.